Bonjour.
Hello, good afternoon to all. Thank you for joining us on this afternoon session. We're trying to start on time so that it will attract other people. We're going to delve into how to maximize the impact of funding towards SDGs. We've got a panel of experts. I've counted together they have more than 100 years of experience to share with us. Before starting, I'd like to give the floor to Philippe Emmerich, who is Associate Director with the Société Générale. He's going to explain what this French bank does in favor of SDG, of sustainable development. Thank you, and good afternoon to all. I'm really happy to introduce this roundtable around impactful finance, and I know that every word counts. It's a very destructive approach, as you will see in a few seconds. I really strongly believe in this approach, and I think it can highly contribute to meet the needs of financing necessary to achieve those sustainable goals. A few figures that you may have in mind. The UN in 2019 has assessed that we had $5.5 and $7 billion of funds each year to achieve the famous 17 SDGs by 2030. About those figures, the unfunded part has been assessed at $600 billion a year, and it's been reviewed last year following the pandemic by OECD, and the actual figure, the funding gap, amounts to $3,700 billion a year. So it gives a sense of the urgency and of the need for all players, both public and private, to mobilize with this opportunity, which is this background of recovery after the pandemic. It needs to be more respectful of the environment and socially more fairer. And to remain on the general level, it's a topic greenwashing, and I'm going to give some figures and concrete examples. We, with Société Générale, were committed with lucidity, humility, and sincerity. We want to play a driving role towards these goals. It's part of the bank mission and of the bank strategy. We do support our clients to together build development models which are more sustainable and inclusive. We constantly exchange information with all of our stakeholders. We do apply, and it's very meaningful for us, the highest standards on the environmental, social, and governance standards. It's a must. All those three dimensions are interlinked. I'm going to give you a few examples. We truly try to have a positive impact on society through our actions and through our approach. And more basically, we are convinced that very rapidly all our activities are going to become ESG on a fundamental way. Within 5 or 10 years, I don't know, depends on each business. But we're in a state of mind where we need to be, using English words, we do need to have positive impact by design. We've been involved with this approach since 20 years. So we work along 4 pillars. The first one, we've been pioneers, and I say it with pride. We contribute to create new standards. We strongly believe in coalitions. I was with other experts this morning and with someone from Senegal. He was explaining to me he takes care of a student association. He was very proud because they've built an association, a consortium of 10 associations, and from this critical mass, they started engaging the public, the government, and the companies. And it's an example of what we've been doing too. We need to engage other players. We need to act collectively to gain more impact and to set shared goals to work together within a framework and common framework and methodology. It really speeds up things. I promise you a few examples in this area. So first of all, creating new standards. We were among the first 4 banks, along with the Katowice agreement, with aligning the credit lines, aligned with the Paris Climate Agreement. This methodology has been made available through open source to other banks. It's now shared with 20 other banks. We've joined a Net Zero Banking Alliance to go beyond and a positive trajectory. The goal is zero carbon by 2050, with the subjects and goal of the limitation of the climate heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius. There are alliances which are more interesting, gathering both banks and industries, like Poseidon, which decarbonization of sea transport, or the Council of Hydrogen, to give hydrogen a greater part in the decarbonization, so to contribute to the establishment of new standards. The second pillar, the most well-known, is to become a leader in the energy transition. We actually proactively align all our activities, both in funding and investment, to the Paris Agreement objectives. Since 2019, we've invested 100 billion euros for the energy transition, and we're going to continue this effort. As for 2020, in renewable energies, Société Générale is the first in matter of advising, and the second in financing. Third pillar, innovation. How do we innovate in the area of ESG? And we've been involved with this for a long time. It was not a joke, a very concrete example. We were among the first, perhaps the first in France, to embed innovation in our research and action. And since then, you can see that the ESG dimension is totally embedded in our financial accounts and analysis. Fourth and last pillar is the will to act with local governments on the ground. We want to be a catalyst of social and environmental impacts, working with those stakeholders both in developed and emergent economies. A very strong example is Africa. We have a program called ProWeave Africa. We're present in Africa for 100 years. We have got a unique positioning. We're the first international bank in Africa. And we, through a lot of initiatives to try to support the development of this continent in the most responsible way, as for ecology, as for the social side of it. We are very proud recently to have found funding, innovative funding for the procurement of solar energy in places absolutely not connected to the electric grid, the existing grid. That's what I wanted to say very briefly. Yes, challenges are huge. I was telling that we have a humble approach. There is no escape. We deal with these issues with a great sense of responsibility and with a great passion. We want to collaborate with our clients, with our whole ecosystem. We know that the goals at stake is to renew our activities to support the new needs of society and moreover to guarantee this more inclusive and sustainable future and in a certain way fairer future. With this in mind, we have developed over the last years a team for research and development totally dedicated to the conception of consequences on impacts. The mission of this team is to work upstream of all banking, traditional banking systems for their projects to both improve the cost efficiency of the projects, which enable those projects to be born. So we try to work as upstream as possible to find this ratio, and we want to favor multi-impact projects. Sometimes we have projects we're going to solve a given issue, urban lightning, for instance, but which is not fundable with this only goal. We can add a collective goal which makes that this project becomes bankable.
And more generally speaking, how to attract the funding towards this new economic model, because these are new economic models that are new. So the scope of the team is very wide. We've focused on the infrastructures, urban infrastructures, energy-related infrastructures, water infrastructure, and circular economy. And I'm going to give back the floor to Marie-Aimée, because she is in charge of this team called impact-based finance, and she's going to tell you more about this team. I wish you a very stimulating and engaged debate on this approach, which in my view is very promising and enables, or will enable, the cards to be reshuffled, because the stakes that we are facing are such that we know we'll have to redefine the rules of the game. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Philippe, for this very inspiring introduction. And I'm going to present to you now the panelists who are going to share with you and share their experience with you. And I will start with Laure Philippon. She's the Sustainable Finance and CSR Transformation Director at ENGIE. She worked in finance management, finance-related communication, and also she took part to the Solidarity Fund by ENGIE 10 years ago, and she's worked on the long-term assets before she's joined the CSR management in 2020. Sébastien Duquet, the Chief Commercial Officer at Sunfunder. He's joined Sunfunder. He joined in Sunfunder to deal with the organization. Then also the Gigaton Empowerment Fund, this program, which is very impressive, and he's going to tell us more about that. Sebastian's been working for more than 20 years on the issues related to development access to energy by the poorest ones, for instance in Morocco, beginning with the year 2000, and also General Director of Planet Finance, and for responsibility and symbiotics, that are main actors of the sector of microfinance. And before that, he worked for Arthur Andersen and Ernst & Young when it comes to the emerging countries. Stéphanie Demey is the Deputy CEO of R3 Energy. She will tell us more what these R3 are. After she worked for food industry at food processing for General Mills, 5 years ago she joined in the consultancy towards to companies, especially when it comes to development, sustainable developments. And then she worked for Greenflex, and then she took part to the kicking off of NG Impact when it comes to the decarbonation of B2B and B2C. And wishing the acceleration of the energy transition of the companies. She's associated to the team of R3 Energy that was created very recently in order to develop the activity of counseling and consulting, especially when it comes to decarbonation, energy efficiency, and corporate roadmap. And Christophe Dumas, CEO of La Ville E+. La Ville E+. It's a perfect example of the application of an approach through impacts, and he's developed an original method for the urban development, sustainable development, in order to make of a city sustainable, more sustainable. 31 years experience at Bouygues, Ingérop, Groupe Duval, and Sogeprom, the real estate company of Société Générale. And as I explained earlier, we have decades and decades of experience gathered here, especially when it comes to the impact which is at the core of their respective businesses. Before I ask them questions, I would like to come back to what exactly impact-based finance means, in order to figure out what we want to do more in order to work closer with our clients. So as Philippe said, we often refer to this concept of fund in gap, these billions that are not invested into sustainable development. It's a figure, 3,700 billions, which is not which is an amount which is probably underestimated. It's about fixing up things and also prevention in order to adapt to climate change. So we refer to this concept of funding gap, but actually we also have to face this problem related to finance gap. Namely, it's also about helping the companies to changing their business models in such a way that they can suggest sustainable and profitable options. And also the amounts at stake are huge. And because we've been talking about that for decades, I'm sure that some of you attended the previous Convergence Forum, and the topic is again on the table, namely how to fund these SDG. Hence the question, shouldn't we change the approach? Shouldn't this approach be more disruptive? And this is why, with this approach through impact-based approach, we don't want to wait for the project to come to us with a request for funds, but rather it's about asking ourselves how we can help support companies, the project bearers, carriers, to increase their impact for a project which is more sustainable and easier to fund, to finance. So how to do that? Well, as you can read, finance-based impact, it's all about impacts. How to increase the impacts achieved by some of the projects, how to combine some of the services, how to multiply the results in such a way that the cost of the infrastructure implemented can be mutualized, either those costs related to logistics or maintenance, in such a way that we can have a project that at the end can be more profitable, can have a better profit, can have a better resilience. And we'll see that more and more digital solutions are a factor of progress, which is huge. It's also a way to connect the different solutions and to have solutions that are more agile, more efficient. In a nutshell, as Philippe said, it's about reducing the cost by the achieved impact, or the other way around, namely increasing the impact through each euro or dollar invested. But in order to be able to offer these multi-impact solutions, the companies or the private sector to express themselves through this application, these requests with a holistic approach of the impacts. And this is a way to open the different silos, so to speak, to call for bids where we'll look for agile solutions in order to solve several problems at the same time. And the selection of the leaders will be done on the basis of them being able to provide impacts rather than delivering equipment or installing infrastructure. So what counts is the result, the impacts, how the problems can be solved, how several problems can be solved at the same time. So this is an approach that we try to conduct, to carry out in different sectors with a radical change related to offer and demand. And even if we do so, it's not going to be enough, because then we realize that this project exists because there are men and women who are the head of this project. And what is paramount for this project to be successful beyond the construction of the project, the solutions that can be discussed or whatever, we want also to have men and women, partners, who are motivated by the same objective to achieve impact results, who will create collaborative, partnership-based ecosystem in order to have results. And when it comes to finance, which is not, however, the main issue, as I explained, when it comes to funding, we also want to improve with a multi-impact approach. We have projects that are stronger, more resilient, and this is key because this would reduce the risks. This would enable us to have projects that are more bankable. And also, it's about figuring out what we do with the philanthropic and public money, which nowadays is distributed in the form of subsidies in order to leverage this investment and to have partners that can relay afterwards. So I'll stop here in such a way that the different speakers, the panelists, can say their word. I'm going to ask them questions, and then we are going to have a Q&A session at the end of this session. And the first question I have is related to the maximization, the optimization of the impact. So my question is, how do you manage for the decision modes, decision-making modes, so to speak, of the different companies to be transformed, companies or the public actors, either ministries or the cities and towns? So how do you support them in transforming their decision-making process for the impact to be back into the core of this decision-making? And what are the different barriers that you've faced in order to perform this transformation? So maybe I'm going to give the floor to Stephanie. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Marie-Aimée. Just a little word to explain to you what are these three R's. R3, sorry. So R3, it's about relaunching the economy, because it's not possible to disconnect ecology or environments from economy. Second, it's about regenerating, because we are reaching the end of no operating mode, and therefore we'll have to find new solutions to reinvent ourselves. And third, rethink things, because it's related to generation. We'll have to rethink the budget, the performance of the companies. We'll have to rethink as well the way we consume. We can see that there are new emerging business models, because we used to be on a known property-based economy and sharing economy. for instance, sharing cars, sharing buildings. So there will be changes. All these will have an impact over companies, towns, cities, how the latter are managed. And we've created this ecosystem with in mind the fact that in thinking, well, it's not possible to work in an isolated way. It's not only about being multi-subject, but also multi-actors. So in these three groups, we've put together different entities to address clients from A to Z, because we've realized that in the middle of the chain, there was like a disruption. So it's about defining the ambition, where we want to go, what is important for us, how to meet the society-related need, and so on. So R3 energy is more going to be about operation, decarbonation, the three scopes, and tangible, pragmatic ways of doing things. What can we do? How to consume less? How to integrate early in the chain of value the construction of these products to manage the end of life.
So we are the company responsible for that. So we manage the upstream and all the suppliers where their products come from. And when at the client, either B2B or B2C, the end of life of those products, once they're said, so we have an ambition, we develop an ESG strategy and decarbonation, it's only consultancy. In the best case scenario, this is our approach. At least we want to work with the persons, with the operators. We want to deliver, like for newborn babies. So this is the first aspect. But even if you've done that and you've got an action plan which goes right, it stops there, and it stops at 2 points. First, on the funding. So we found a lot of ideas. We know how to improve both in tangible and intangible impact. So I reduce my energy consumption. I spare carbon. I've got a more product more respectful of the environment. So intangible is long-term impacts on the society, on the social role of the company, my impact on the local ground, and my reputation, which is gaining importance for the company. So the funding will be at the heart of our discussion, is key. This is where we intervene. We support our clients. Yes, we build up your strategy, the roadmap, the plan of action, and now you suggest funding solutions. Starting with energy certificates, ES2E, and we work with the banking institutions like Société Générale with already a package solution supported by the bank. And then you have the perfect three partners. So savings enrich your program, so your program costs less. And in order to guarantee that that we've got the right dimension, we raise our sleeves and we sign a contract, a partnership with the company on the economic side, on the environmental side, and we commit ourselves. And if we don't meet the goals, we rectify and we go, because there is no more choice possible. There is an urgency. This is a will with R3 to decompartmentalize those silos. And the last silo, I said there were three of them, engineering firms for the support. But when the brains have pulled out a strategy, we can't fail on the implementation. So we need to follow the client. My mic is out. I can't speak anymore. Okay, I go out. It's important to understand this. What does it mean on the company level? A company, she belongs to the territory where she lies. Don't take it to the moon. She's not dimension for this. Its industry hardware is not made for this. So we first work on improving the existing structure within 2 or 3 years, very rapidly. And at the same time, we need to work on the longer term, on the version number 2. If I would found my company today, I'm Nestlé or companies who have 100 years are very old, and how would they be like today? They would have a distribution circuits very different. So we need to be on this trajectory. Your business model is no longer viable for all the motives I gave. You need to solve your short-term and mid-term goals. You need to get your staff involved because there will be huge changes within your company. So embed this into your DNA and implement this. Implementation is the most important. It's not only vertical classification after a consultancy mission. No, I agree with you. It's very inspiring. And the follow-up and the commitment towards performance, this brings confidence and helps notably to find funding. As I was saying, the people we commit ourselves with are as important as the model of cash flow and the financial analysis. To go on this thread, Stephanie, you were speaking of the approach for companies. To go on with Christophe to see how it works for public authorities, local governments, and cities. Yes, on the city level, I'm the co-founder of a startup, as Marie-Aimée was introducing me. A startup developed from an entrepreneurial approach within Société Générale, with along strategic development of the group, along the concept of sustainable cities 4 years ago. And nowadays we are a consultancy firm helping local governments and local funders, but essentially local governments in France, in Belgium, and now in Africa. So we also take part in the Grow with Africa project. Everything what Stephanie said belongs to our method to help cities. It means there is a need now to manage cities independently. If we speak about a neighborhood or a whole city, you can no longer manage a city the way we used to, with silos or solving a lodging problem with a real estate solution only, without studying the impacts on other areas. Solving a transport problem, thinking only about transport. You need a systemic, holistic, global approach for all issues. The organization of local governments doesn't work this way in France. You've got a division of public transport and of mobility, lodging, ecology transition, and our experience shows us over the last 3 years that the local governments who have this cross-sector mentality, the mayor and his nearest councillors, when they go to the public market on Sundays, they know how to answer questions about mobility as on lodging or security or other aspects. So the governance of the local government have this vision, but in the reality, in the implementation, it doesn't go this way. You really need today this cross-sector, systemic, holistic approach. This is the first thing. Second aspect, you need this approach by impacts. What does it mean on an urban planning? You no longer reason in terms of solutions, but in terms of goals. First of all, I start asking myself the good questions. The solution of an issue, where do I want to have an impact on? If I take a very concrete example, in a local government where there were very impactful traffic issues, because a huge part of the population, around 20 to 30 kilometers around, came to this city because it was very attractive for job reasons, with very limited roads to come to this urban area. And the thinking for many years, well, you've got some traffic jams, so we're going to replace cars by buses. I'm oversimplifying, but if you suppress cars along an axis, doesn't hinder problems because people will still use their cars. Actually, the consultancy we gave to remain very schematic and general to try to get people closer from where they work, having them living much more closer to their jobs was another way of approaching this issue. So with the part of this solution solved through a real estate aspect, we were solving a mobility issue. But asking, first of all, the question, where do I want an impact? Not only an impact on mobility, but at the same time, we think the territory, which means huge investments on the long term. So let's seize the opportunity to achieve other goals. Can't we improve the economic activity? Can't we have an impact on health, etc., etc.? These are the prerequisites and the previous thinking we bring with our new approach with the local governments, because this is what we are speaking about. But please first think holistically, set some goals that you can replicate over the years, and you need to go on with this process up to the implementation. And the very important step is the co-construction with the stakeholders. You can't carry out a project on a territory if you don't have integrated all the stakeholders, the elected officials or the usual citizens, associations, local trade. It is no longer possible to do anything without involving everyone. The great upside of this is you can speed up the conception phase, first of all, integrating all stakeholders, because at the exit, at the end, you will reduce or neutralize the risk of appeals, controversies, which appear in all local governance the old way. If you strongly diminish risks, you strike a lot of good points for funding partners. It's important for funding partners, for instance. Yes, co-constructed projects are very well accepted by all the players and the stakeholders, and thus they will be much more resilient in times of crisis and will create more loyalty and adhesion. It will have an impact on profitability and consequently on the bankability of these projects. We spoke a lot, Angela, of the situation in developed countries, and especially in France, but it's important when as we spoke earlier, that this funding and investment gap on sustainable projects doesn't lie in Europe, but in emerging countries. 90% of this funding gap is in developing countries, and half of it in Africa. So how do we face this issue? How can we do more with less and reduce impacts in these regions? That's something the floor to Sébastien, who's going to share his experience with us.
Merci, Marie-Aimée.
Thank you, Marie-Aimée. So indeed, I'm going to share a few figures with you. So it's not always easy to remember them, but globally, 25,000 billion of kilowatts. Well, let's say 25. So they are produced by 12 of these OECD countries and 12 others not by countries which are not part of OECD, including China. So in 9 years' time, we'll switch from 24 to 35 plus 11. And in 2040, it will be 42, namely plus 17. In other words, plus 70% in terms of energy production at a global level. The share of the OECD will be the same with agreements between different countries, in favor or not of the Paris Agreement. But the plan is for us to stay at the level of 12. No more energy produced. So the developing countries will switch from 12 to 30, in other words. 12 plus to 30 plus 18, in other words, in the next 15 years. Their growth will generate more energy than what we produce in Europe, in the United States and Australia. Not once more, but once 1.5 more. So if you stop using your car, traveling by plane, or eating meat, well, your efforts will be annihilated because other people at the other end of the world will have a consumption of energy that will be higher than yours. So if, when it comes to power, for instance, today there's a huge consumption of power. How many people, as an index, how many people don't have access to power supply? Well, 1 billion. Until in 2030, 2 billion people will have access to power. In other words, twice more the number of European people will have access to power supply in 10 years' time. So the question which is fundamental when it comes to development, it's how are we going to enable people to fund their access to power supply or to energy. So there's some people who say, well, they don't need energy. Well, actually, no, they underconsume for the moment, but at some point, they will want to have the same things as what we have. For instance, having a fridge, having their kids going to school, hospitals, and so on. And here, when it comes to that, there are good news. First, for the moment, there is no nuclear power plants, there is no thermal power plant, there is no coal plant. So it's very easy to innovate here. So when it comes to energy, thanks to innovation, we can help these people to go beyond a key gap, to bridge a gap. And also the other good news is that solar energy is the cheapest, producing 1 kilowatt hour with solar power. That's especially the case in sub-Saharan Southern Africa. So we thought, well, we're going to fund on-the-ground projects for access to solar energy, solar power of population who for the moment don't have access to energy. In other words, 90% of our fundings are in Southern Africa. And then we'll support people, we'll help people to become equipped with a solar energy system. For instance, a farmer with a solar panel that's in order to provide energy for a fridge and so on and so forth. Or a village, that's what we'll call a mini grid, or at a bigger scale, a big field or a big rooftop, equipping several villages, and this will be 5-6 millions for the first farmers, and also for mini grids for villages, and for several villages it will be about 20 million. So on the field, on the ground, we would identify the projects, we support them as for the funding, and we fund them. And in 8 years, about 100 of organizations of this kind have been funded at about 23 countries, African countries, 10 million people just with this funding from Sunfounder who have managed to have access to their own energy production. So we call that gigaton. Why? So because we want to communicate on the feeling of urgency. This movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, at a time when the banker from Geneva, when he hears that his aunt received a lot of money, has a heritage from his aunt, a huge amount of money. Well, his banker in Geneva said, well, come quickly. And we have to do the same. We have to do that now. We call it megaton because in 10 years' time, it will be too late. That's why we want to equip about 50 million households with photovoltaic solutions. If we don't do it, then nobody else is going to do so. And it's 50 million people amongst the 800 I referred to earlier. It would be 50 million people who are going to equip themselves with a power supply with devices that are very polluting, or wood, or coal, even worse. And in this case, the environmental impact will be huge. That's what we call the Gigaton Fund. It's going to be scalable because on objective number 2, because we want to be pioneers on a few things, but we want to duplicate that at a wide scale, things that can be duplicable in such a way that there's a huge impact for these things to be multiplied. And we are backed by bigger companies such as NG, EDF, and so on. Now, it's about, for instance, 20 million euros in order to fund about 100,000 people in Uganda and so on. So indeed, things have been working well. Indeed, this is a company, a fund that has put impacts at the core of their business model in a successful manner, because there has been 3 funds that have demonstrated that this team is very experienced, and now Sunfunder is a way to levy this Gigaton fund, because this team has the trust from their clients and from the different countries backing their projects. This is a great transition for L'Or, because indeed these projects are experience grounds for these multi-impact experiences. We go to in-country to put in place this mini-grid, and how can we manage for these projects to be successful? Thank you, and thank you to Sébastien for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I would like to tell you about 2 subjects at NG. Access to energy, access to power, especially in Africa. So we are present when it comes to this topic through energy access. It's a core business for NG. We have 1 million clients. We are present in 9 countries in Africa. And the fund Rassembleur d'énergie, it's a solidarity fund. It's a solution for commitment of the different employees of energy, of NG. And it's also a minority investor with some entities in Africa and India. So energy is indeed an entry door for many other impacts. And to bounce back on what was said before in consultation, discussion, based on the discussion with the different population, it's not only about a home system, it's also about figuring out what this energy is going to be for, this system, what is it going to be for, so the impact can be multiplied on this topic. One of my colleagues is working on is talking about women empowerment in another room here today, because we've realized that when we give access to a shop managed by a woman, she has more money, but also she becomes more autonomous. It's a way for her to become more empowered. And there's, for instance, cooking with coal. So we would suggest another solution, combating deforestation, and solar system. When we do that, we know our clients better, because we are on a pay-as-you-go system. So because of this credit system, we are more in a position to offer, to suggest student loans. And the main need and the main request is about the water pumps. So sometimes we would come up with solution for solar home systems, for water pump, but also fridges and so on. And in doing all that at the same time, we would multiply the impact, but also we would make the funding of the project easier. I will open brackets because with Marie-Aimée we met in a working group, CFO task force for the SDGs, and in order to quantify, analyze the contribution of the companies. For instance, I will stop saying SDG in, well, actually, ODD in French, ODD in French, the translation of SDG. Anyway, we thought of that a lot at NG because the contribution to the SDGs is not only about the impact-based finance, but also it's about the companies wondering how they can tangibly contribute to that, because we used to think about we used to be willing to avoid the negative impact, but now we're more focused on the positive impact. And for 1 year, we've been thinking about accelerating the transition to a carbon neutral transition. So how to do that tangibly? We have an objective for 2045. And all that is explains the reason why we've changed our processes. We've reviewed and adapted our budgets, and we have defined criteria. And even in a business which is not based finance-based, but we have an impact that can trigger investments, because in the these reflections are very interesting. But it's not really the developing countries, but it can have a high impact there because there's a lot of capitals on these investments. Absolutely. And indeed, within each companies, there are global scale companies such as NG, Société Générale, and so on. And actually, the impact is at all the levels of the company, the buildings used, because Christophe knows that very well, because he had he took part to the eco building of one of the headquarters of one of the companies. But also, it's about the behavior of the employees, the influence we may have on our providers, our clients, and so on, our suppliers, and so on. So it's very important to apply this approach everywhere with all the entities, and also in the way we do things. It's not only about profitability and the sustainability of the companies, but also with the objectives of impact. And in doing all that, we would have stronger projects that have people following even more these ideas, this will, and these projects, and things would be easier for the lenders to lend money, funds. So how is it possible to have these fundings attracted on these new economic models? Whether it is about the developed countries or less developed countries. So what are the issues related to funds, to finance, the most frequent that you had to face? And also, how is it possible to do more with less, especially when it comes to the different sources of funding? Because the world of finance is not monolithic, so to speak. There are investors who like risk, others like less risks. But when it comes to developing new business models in risky countries, it's difficult to include, to involve private investors. Hence the role of public money, of philanthropy, to fund these entities in these situations. So I'll give you the floor back, Laure, to tell us more about your experience feedback when it comes to the funding of these projects. So when it comes to funding, there are two worlds that meet up, especially when it comes to a big theoretical appetite of the investors, namely, especially when it comes to decarbonation or investment with an impact. But as I say, there are two worlds.
We're one of the first of green bond issuers in the world. Those green bonds are finance instruments on the financial market, but we guarantee that investors that those bonds go towards green projects favoring decarbonation. We were one of the first issuers in 1994. In 2014, and we have some 20 bonds issued. Well, no problem at all to find funds for these green bonds. And finally, we find the money for those bonds at a lower cost. The investors are there, they're happy, no problem at all. The challenge on this, Marie-Aimée will agree with me on that. How we guarantee that all this sustainable finance on the corporate level does contribute to the SDGs, and that we are not doing the greenwashing with only the flag as green to reassure the investors that we are contributing to the green world. But it does work anyway. We need to remain vigilant. As for the access to energy in developing countries, we can see that it's harder. The interest is there, but projects need time. They are more risky because we are speaking of developing countries. We can guarantee them with the multi-impact aspect, but we saw that the COVID crisis has provoked a lesser interest from investors, so the investors are less inclined to invest in those products. So we can see the interest of those projects. We can not only find the money in time and in the amount required. So we need money in the beginning of the project, and we see it's harder. Commercial banks are there. They're ready to finance, but if they would get some more guarantees, it would be easier for the first period of those projects. And there is a chemistry that isn't always there at the beginning of projects. We cannot always structure everything. On the business side of ENGIE, we had not so many problems. We could find some internal financing, but for Rassembleur d'énergie, energy gatherer within ENGIE, everything was there to work, but the spark was lacking to structure things as we would like it to be. There's a lot of work and efficiency and collaborative work in order to speed up the launching of these projects with several stakeholders, the investors who want some more risk, those who want less risk. So this is one of the aims of this creation of a foundation, the fund for little projects, diversified projects which could attract bigger investors. Christophe, could you tell a little bit more about the experience of small financer? And with your funds and funders, how do you attract investors, potential investors? Thank you, Marie-Aimée. How to bring up this spark that Laure mentioned? Why do we need a spark to start up a fire? We've got local banks, commercial banks, which are branches of large groups. Société Générale is very much present in Africa. Projects are too small or too big for them. When you come with 20 million in Mozambique, it's really heavy. Last year, we funded the replacement of phone antennas in Central Africa, 1,000 antennas with electrogen groups, 15 million euros. It represents 1/3 of the foreign investment for the year in Central Africa. If you go to the local commercial bank, it will be blocked. It's too big for us. Sometimes it's too little, sometimes it's too big, sometimes they don't know the sector. So local banks are not the correct answer for the organization we want to support. Support on the very long term, so people get bored. We need to follow the African entrepreneurs which have launched an innovative project, sometimes with some external help, sometimes alone. And can take up to 1 to 2 years in Central Africa, more than 2 years of work. The more I advance, the less I am productive. I was achieving 3 financements a year, and now it's bad productivity. Many projects get lost. We spend a lot of time to help the entrepreneur. It's not the business of a bank. A bank is not necessarily competent on this. So we fundings of 3 million a year, so we can build a building with 4 stories, and you've done your million in one day. So it creates. We've got management costs which are very high, and we're limited geographically. Central Africa, nobody wants to finance RDC, Zimbabwe, Mozambique. Are difficult countries for banks. We need to bring institutional investors to those countries. So I'm in charge of La Défense. I was responsible for responsibility symbiotic as well. When you tell French leaders, I take the most developed country in Africa, Senegal, France, along has never done anything. Chad, DRC. So they are very cautious in France to finance emerging countries. It's less true in other continents, but to go, there are the currency issues, the exchange issue. Funds, we call them blended finance. First of all, before it was called PPP, private-public partnership. So blended finance means there are several categories of investors will take up several shares of the fund. And we need 3 different kinds of players to bring money rapidly. We need institutional, European or American, private, pension funds, insurers. They can put $100 and $200 million if they like the projects. We need them. They manage your savings, your pension fund. They don't want to lose money. They want to get their money back. So it needs to be very tidy. So we need those. How do we protect those investors? With 2 other players. First ones, we take the first losses, and we know to be innovative. We want to go to difficult countries. We want to have a loss. The project will slide because there will be a coup or spend a lot of time with Oxus restructuring their microfinance. Nothing to do with solar energy, but Taliban's come, they break everything, your microfinance institution. Even if you spend 15 years, you can't pay back your investor, and that's the way it is. And the same with us. Incidents with the production of energy on the state actors. So we need levels of investors who take the first losses, and those are the hardest ones to find. So the foundations need to go all the way. American Foundation, Proxima Foundation has invested a lot. IKEA does invest a lot. The French Foundation need to go all the way. This NG has its foundation, the Foundation of France. It's incredible that the Foundation of France doesn't finance any of those projects. It's hallucinating if you think thoroughly. The big foundations, the family foundations, need to invest in those first loss trenches. They will have some money back. If it goes south, we will have created a 500 billion fund. Thanks to €1, we can find 10 euros. Thanks to the private investor and the public development agency. Why the public development agency are not at the bottom? Because the public development agency, we took 7 years to take them at the next level. We tell them, no, you're going to help us take away the private investors, so they need to take risks that, unfortunately, currently, their financiers, they don't have the mandate to do AFD, AB8. They invest what they have to invest, but if there were some more political pressure telling them to invest more, you will lose money, but you'll capitalize your money. €1 by Proparcours or AFD how much money it is brought to the projects and how much did you bring. It will be a change of paradigm. So the first losses, which if the project goes well, will be reimbursed, and public agencies with junior investors and private investors above. And this is how we want to structure the next fund. And the hardest is, you will have understood this, to find the investors who take the first losses. There are great pension funds. If you come with a very tidy project, not a lot in France, but if you go to pension in Denmark, it's okay. They finance right away. Allianz in Germany, or the great institutional financer in France will perhaps come. We don't need extra investors if we get them, okay, but we need the first-class investors. I totally agree. This is the future, because the amounts we need to fund are really huge. We need this lever to attract private capital, because there will never be enough public money for those investment of several billions a year. Why do we need us? And here we don't need it, because the state enters. It's your subsidies. It's the European Commission, the City of Paris. So what you don't see is all the similar projects are subsidized by your money. In Mozambique, in Kinshasa, in the state has not the budget, it cannot maintain the hospital. So that's why we need the European investors do invest, so that you understand why we need the money while other projects don't. But even if we have a lot of subsidies in France and in Europe, it's not a reason to waste them and not to use the same lever that is absolutely necessary and essential in developing countries. To go quickly, Christophe and Stéphanie. Christophe, could you share with us an experience, a concrete experience of how a good design of a project focused on impacts can help the funding and the confidence to the lenders, You will have understood we are not the direct actors of the finances on the funding, but we have an impact. We've realized on all projects we've followed, both private and public, that we can combine clarity and transparency in the storytelling and in the design of the project based on co-construction, the embedding of all stakeholders with tangible, clear objectives, impact indicators in the realization phase. If the project is well conceived, well designed, it is reassuring when you look out for funding, inclusively to find a label or a subsidy, a public subsidy. Inevitably, it reassures. It is clear if it's an elected official, he has a political instrument to mobilize public funding and to convince its constituency. And after all, himself or herself, with such an approach, you will create social value, as well as the investors and the promoters will have their money back and build some assets. So we think first of the human and the life framework. We have to have a clear vision where we aimed at, clear goals, and clear measurement of if we go along the roadmap. If we go adrift, it's not very serious. We rectify. So it helps us have a positive impact on the perception of funding, because there is a risk management. When we speak of funding, I'm not a banker, but I'm within a banking group. So the risk management, when you set all these aspects, you have a good risk management. Yes, risk management is pivotal for the credit decision-making, but the impact becomes an essential criterion be it among banks or individual investors or pension funds, which want to give more sense to their investments because they're convinced that to invest into a project which has a positive impact will be a more resilient project which will resist a crisis opposed to another project which doesn't solve anything on the planet side. Stephanie, do you have any concluding words with your experience in funding research and in developing these funding? So, on the company and industry side, opposed to my colleagues, which will give a different lightning on this, there is no funding problem in France and in Europe, and to operate this transition, there has never been more money with the Green Deal. We've sent all the available funding for the industry and the companies, and more than 2,850 credit lines. So it's a nightmare for entrepreneurs. If you're a very small company, what you're entitled to, in which form. So what you trigger, you need to apply to fill in your form and you get the money, or you introduce your project, your impact, and you get the money if you implement what you've designed and foreseen. So we've got on the regional level, on the state level, it's a nightmare. We have not solved this management on the administrative side. And what we see, and I'm not sure if the consequence of COVID, and I'm a consultant for 5 years now, we had industry people and companies who came to us saying, we have got a project, can you help us find its dimension and help us funding it? And they would manage along with their banking agent to find a credit line. It would come back because the banker would not understand the project, so we had some, and now we see the opposite. Clients who go to banks, and banks come to us and say, yeah, I know there are some changes in business models and sectors are transitioning towards or are going to disappear. We've seen it. If you get the photographs on silver plates, Kodak has disappeared. So this question of risk, which is very strong, and we're going to act as intermediaries both to reassure the industry. It's an investment on 5, 10, or 15 years. Is it sustainable? And help banks guaranteeing it's a good investment.
I said something earlier, namely ecosystem. In other words, what we're trying to figure out is that there's an industrial and a territory, and the industrial shouldn't think for himself. We do industrial symbiosis and have releases that may be raw material for my neighbor, for instance. So how can we organize ourselves? We have a common field. How can we organize a photovoltaic field because we're a bit far from the network, from the grid? So all this is important, namely the mutualization, innovating reflection, and hence this use economy. This is new. New means also risks, but risk in the sense of unknown, something which is difficult to assess, to evaluate. But anyway, we have to take the risk, because if we don't take this risk, well, nothing is going to be done. As you said, it's things are urgent, and indeed, now we're in an urgent situation, and we work with partners, and we do these tripartite collaboration, and this is a new business model, a new way to act. These things are coming up again, and how tomorrow we are going to live, how we are going to travel, how we'll go on vacations, how we will be working. These things are all unknown to us, in the future. But anyway, we have the money. We just have to mobilize them. Yes, this collaborative working mode in an ecosystem is something which is very recent. The economic world, capitalism, is based on competency and competition. And the SDGs, the main thing, namely especially the SDG 17, it's based on partnerships, and that's why the projects will be successful after they've been designed or developed properly. Now over to you for questions or comments to one or several panelists. Please don't hesitate if there's something that is still unclear to you, or whether we were a bit too technical in some place. Yes, I have a question to Sébastien. How much do you think you can levy, especially for the selection of projects, for their funding, especially in Southern Africa countries, especially when it comes to eco-finance, because I've always been stricken by the dissociation between the projects related to equipments and the support to microfinance institutions. Well, the individual photovoltaic equipments, the solar room systems, were created initially by people working in microfinance, because these are micro-leasing, if you will. Micro-leasing. A photovoltaic system for a small African farmer would cost 2,000 euros or $2,000, and it will be a way for the farmer to have about 3-4 plugs to power supply, a TV, a fridge. And this farmer would be able to refund that amount of money with a monthly installment of 20-30 euros, which is the cost of a subscription if he had to register for power supply, to be supplied in power. So that's how we work. The farmer would be, we would equip this farmer, and so after providing the equipment to this farmer, we have the farmer paying 20 or 30 euros per month, and after 3 to 5 years, this farmer will own this equipment. And this is very much inspired from microfinance. It's a true constraint. I didn't refer to that earlier. I didn't have time for that. But, you know, the average wage in Southern African countries is of about 150 euros per month. And it's not possible to have something as expensive as 15,000 euros. That's why we have to do things there with, in taking into account the incomes that are lower with the population, especially in populations that are more fragile. So it's indeed related to microfinance, and there are actors, specialists in this topic, that actors that specialized on this topic. Hi everyone, and thank you very much for your presentations. You are a gold mine of knowledge, of insight, and thank you very much. I would like to speak to Mrs. Philippon. You referred to SDGs at an international level, and when it comes to the French level, how to make these SDGs more sustainable. You were also the Sustainable Finance and CSR Transformation Director. So how do you see the very long-term sustainability strategy of NG, especially when it comes to storing gas? In the short term, it's not in danger, but in the very long term, this may disappear. So do you have long-term strategy to make sure that employment is maintained, amongst other things? Thank you for this very interesting question. Indeed, this echoes these topics related to fair transition with these issues related to employment maintaining. So in our portfolio, portfolio, we have this aspect related to coal plants, and we want to close this plant by 2027 at the latest. But in the meantime, we'll have to take into account other issues such as employment. We'll have to support the employees working in this plant, but also sometimes there are issues that are very local, because if we close this coal power plant, then there will be a problem related to power supply. So it's not possible to close these plants overnight. And also there's a matter related to transition on new professions. But at ENGIE, we don't believe in all electrical in Europe. If we only deal with renewable, the power will be too expensive and the system is not going to be fully reliable. So gas is still has to play a key role, especially when it comes to renewable gas. And GRDF is the grid in France, the main grid in France, with 100, and we want to have 100% of renewable gas in the grid until 2050. That's why we're focused on this topic related to biomethane, also hydrogen. So biomethane, we're quite ahead of time. But when it comes to hydrogen, we're still testing things. We are still working with other industrials to figure out how to optimize things. But for ENGIE, storing hydrogen is something we are taking into account. So indeed, these activities are not going to disappear in the future. By 2050, gas will still be there with green gas. But, you know, we have to adapt things. And I'm working on CSR transformation, and we have teams who are working hard on the training of the employees to new professions. I think it's more in the mindset. For 15 years, I worked on oil and gas projects funding. And overnight, I felt very comfortable with using my knowledge when it comes to investments and so on, in order if something underlying different. So that's the case for a number of employees, engineers in this field. It's about having them managing to project themselves and be willing to learn new competencies, new skills. Whatever the conclusion of what we talked about this afternoon, whatever the topic we talked about, it's about having a global approach through the impact. It's not only about assessing things based on finance or technical or technique or legal criteria, but it's about having indexes that are a way for us to assess things simultaneously, all at the same time. Hence the social impact, the climate impact, and so on and so forth. And that's why we're now developing tools that enable us to measure, to assess all these. And now it's the moment to make decisions. The combination of all these things are going to enable us to make the right decision at the right time. And in taking into account all these different things and not based on just one element. This impact-based approach is global, is systemic. And that's what counts, and that's the change, the transformation that all the organizations are undergoing, whether these organizations are public or private. I think there's another question. So, as Anton said, thank you very much for sharing your insight with us. Very inspiring indeed. Mr. Dumas, you've just answered partly the question I was about to ask. You said that you select projects that are impact-based. You make sure that the project is unfolding well. You make sure that the approach is holistic. But what about the ROI? For instance, investment on finance. What about the ROI, the return on investment? What about the indicators, the indexes, the performance index that you use to calculate this ROI, to select the best projects, the very best projects, and assess your performances? So when it comes to cities, it depends on the purpose. We would reinvent things all the time, so to speak. We have basic models. In our startup, we've designed an assessment tool related to the impact, integrating different dimensions. For instance, the alignment when it comes to the sustainable development objective. And the more we have SDGs, the more this ratio will be high. And also there are other things that have to be taken into account. Anyway, our philosophy is the following. We want to co-build these indexes. Now, when it comes to ROI, to the financial part, there are indexes that are already existing, social, economic impact, and so on. And then, it's a clever combination of all these indexes. Our philosophy is to do things on a case-by-case basis. For instance, in the context of collaborative workshops with collaboration on projects. And then we are, it's about assessing the impact. We have to be very humble. It's only the beginning. And we have everything to do.
To go on with ROI, we've got a method of calculus of ROI which is very traditional and obsolete because it doesn't take into account the negative impact. It doesn't value, it doesn't identify and negative value to all the negative impacts, be them the fines that you receive or the issues or the problem the project is facing because you didn't adopt this holistic approach upstream. There is a whole international work group thinking about how to integrate within international accounting both positive and negative impacts to have a more complete ROI so that in financial accounts you have this valuation beside the tools that Christophe and the other panelists are developing to assess the impact independently of the financial side. Well, that's it. Thank you to you all four. And thank you for joining us, to the audience.